Hi, my name is Rebekah Mangels. As she mentioned, I'm a musician, activist, and scholar. My talk today is about the force of labor music, and I'm so excited to share with you what I've prepared today. So, as you can see, I will be playing some music, I will be singing some songs, and at the end I will ask you to also sing with me. But don't worry, if you're not musically inclined, I will teach you, I promise. No shame here. So I want to introduce myself a little bit, provide some context on why I'm here. A large part of my life is activism, and a large part of my activism is actually my music. So I am in a band called Mangels. We write protest music, we do like riot girl stuff, and we also do softer stuff. And I have a great community in the DIY community here in TEDxNormal and Central Illinois. We've recently organized a music festival for gender non-conforming and women in the music industry, and specifically fronting bands today in TEDxNormal. So I really value the opportunity to share more about my musical activism. So you might be asking yourself, like, why should protest music matter to me if I'm not a musician? And that's a completely valid question. I am going to tell you today about how research is showing that the strongest movements across history have actually used music. So even things we take for granted today, like maybe the 5-day work week, right? Or parental leave, if you've ever been on parental leave, that's something that you have the labor movement to thank for. So I will be talking about how music played a role in those very important movements. Things that people fought and died over are now things that we benefit from today. So I want to get right into it. Back in Gastonia, in North Carolina in the 1920s, it's over a century ago, which is wild, and it was a very important time in labor history because people were being exploited very heavily by the mill bosses, the people who were weaving and working the mills all day long, usually 14-hour shifts, and then their bosses started using this method known as the stretch out. Now, the stretch out involved working maybe two shifts worth of work in one shift. So in that sense, they were trying to increase labor and productivity, but in the same amount of time. If you've ever done this, then you know that it can be very exploitative. And so they obviously did not take that very well. They struck, they protested, and music was a huge part of that movement down in Gastonia in the South, because they were using songs at their protests so regularly. And it was advanced by this new technology at the time, which is now known as the radio. And so this new technology was an excellent way to disseminate music all across this region, right? So they had this music connecting them as a community. Imagine if all of Central Illinois was knowing the same songs and singing the same songs, and just how powerful that would be. So these songs were a very crucial part of the movement in obtaining workers' rights. And a lot of them were fighting and dying because the bosses did not respond well to their protests. They responded with a lot of violence. And so you can read all about it in the book by Rosquinho and Donaher in 2004. It is called The Voice of Southern Labor. And I cite this all the time in my thesis. I think it's a fascinating book, and I just wanted to point that out to you in case you'd like to learn more. But they do talk about one very important historical figure, and this woman is Ella Mae Wiggins. She was a songwriter, activist, and balladeer. And what that means, if you don't know, she traveled around singing songs in the movement and all the protests. She would also write a lot of these songs. The Gastonia strike was initially unsuccessful, but it was one of the biggest labor moments in the United States history. And I do also want to talk about the spirituals, though, because the spirituals, if you're not familiar, were a African-American art form that began under chattel slavery. And so they would write songs and compose them through the oral tradition. It's not like they wrote them down necessarily, but they would pass them on through generations. And these songs were so important. And especially because later on, the labor movement drew and borrowed so many of the spiritual tunes. A lot of their lyrics were slightly modified to fit the labor movement, and I just think that's amazing. There's a lot of religious themes in the spirituals, but you'll also notice that you can see encoded meaning of physical liberation that they wanted to happen. They wanted to escape slavery and enforced labor. They wanted to be able to escape or run away or at least go to heaven when they died, and they knew that God valued their lives as human beings even when their enslavers did not. And so I think that this is important for the labor movement today because it's really poignant, and I think that the fact that they had hope, and not only did they want spiritual liberation in the afterlife, but they also wanted physical liberation in this lifetime. And so it's no surprise then that the labor movement has drawn on so many spirituals because they represent the most resistant rhetoric to oppression that is known, and I argue that they are some of America's first labor protest songs. If you're not familiar with the biblical Moses narrative, this is actually pointing directly to that narrative. And it's a time when God's chosen people had to escape enslavement in Egypt. And so they were running away, and Pharaoh's people were chasing after them. And then God parted the Red Sea in the Bible so that they could cross through the Red Sea safely on the other side, while all of Pharaoh's people drowned when the waters came back in. And so if you don't know, now you know. But this is important because it's obvious in this imagery that they're talking about this narrative of wading through the water, of crossing maybe the Red Sea, maybe the River Jordan, right? And there can be encoded meanings there of, well, they had to cross this river to escape to the north. And so this was something that they did to avoid suspicion from their white enslavers, but it's something that now scholars recognize as being representative of not only spiritual but physical liberation. I want to draw attention to the fact that in the last few examples I've used, there have been the undeniable presence of African American and Black art forms that the labor movement has continually drawn upon. And I think that this is such a beautiful thing. It's not something that, unfortunately, we recognize much today. Like when I say labor music, you might think Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger, lots of white men. And I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that there is such a more diverse representative sample of our population that has contributed to the labor movement over time. And so I do want to talk a little more about this because, especially in the history of the labor movement in America, we see white women participating alongside Black women, white men participating alongside Black men. The labor always has been intersectional, and so in my thesis, I ask why then do we think of this labor movement as being incredibly whitewashed? Should liberation not be for all people, or do workers' rights only qualify for some? And so this is one example. Solidarity Forever is a song that drew on a spiritual. It's called John Brown's Body. Was named after John Brown, a known abolitionist at the time, and then it was rewritten to represent the labor struggle. The importance of Black, especially Black female contributions to the movement is undeniable. One figure, Zilphia Horton, drew on the work of Black women, and we don't even talk about it in history today. Now, if you're not familiar with Zilphia Horton, that's perfectly fine. I wasn't either until I started this research for my thesis. She was a labor activist and song archivist. Similar to Ella Mae Wiggins, she would travel around, go to these protests, but a lot of the time, rather than necessarily writing the songs, she would usually record them, write them down. So in the African American tradition, where we have more of an oral tradition that is passed down from generation to generation without necessarily being written down, we would have more white scholars generally writing down these songs and recording them. But in history, we often see that those people are the ones attributed with having discovered the song or even having written the song, whereas that is not necessarily the case. They simply wrote it down. The fact that it had been around for generations is often not acknowledged in history. And so one such example, We Shall Overcome, is the perfect example for this. We Shall Overcome, according to Raymond in 2014, was taught to Zilphia Horton by Black women of a union. And this later went on to become the anthem of the International Workers of the World. Now, if you're not familiar with them, they are the biggest singing union known to us thus far in history. They were very, very poignantly fighting for human rights, workers' rights especially, and they sang this as their anthem. Now, the fact that Black women taught this to Zilphia Horton may not be a well-known fact in history, but I want to keep talking about it until people finally recognize the actual contributions that took place. Maybe they were behind the scenes, yes, but as a scholar, I have the responsibility to give credit where credit is due. Oh, thank you. African Americans have been protesting the social order since as long as America has been around. And especially Black women have contributed heavily to this movement because sexism and racism both affects them. So as intersectional people, they represent the interests of multiple parties. Their protest music has served arguably as the foundation for resistance all across the United States, and I think that that deserves recognition. So now that I've told you what the problem is, you might be asking yourself, what can I do? I'm not a scholar, or maybe you are, but what if I'm not? And maybe I'm not a musician. What can I do? That's a great question. I want to tell you, and I want to give you some examples and ideas of how you can implement this knowledge in your everyday life. So today, we have problems going on with labor still. As an ISU activist in the union, we worked on our second contract. We did not win that contract. It was not a good contract, and there was an extreme lack of solidarity. And I say that not to bring you down, but just to be honest, that we could have really used greater support from the public. And in my opinion, that is what tends to sway the tide of contract negotiations. It is all about public opinion. And so I think that as we use music and as we think about music as a tool that was used in movements across history, why are we not using it as much today? I think we should bring it back. I think that we need to be using music more as a tool because it unites people. People know what the message is, and it's in bite-sized, consumable form. And so on this graph, you will see that the worker productivity has significantly increased in the recent years, and the hourly compensation has really plateaued. So I want to draw your attention to the red line on this graph, the union membership. Union membership has gone down significantly, and as a result, people aren't being compensated for the work that they're doing. The productivity that they're producing is going to those corporations and not really to the laborers who produce it. So this is a problem, and I think that music really has a hand in being able to solve it. And we need to be asking ourselves, maybe, what are some of the people at our workplace that have problems, and what are they saying? Are they being silenced? Because as we've discovered in history, no voice is silent, but sometimes people are silenced. Are we using our power for good? Are we voting for people who are pro-worker and who have pro-worker policies rather than doing us lip service? Are we using our power for good, or are we reinforcing the same biases and prejudices that people fought and died for? So I want to talk about that. And I also want to teach you a song today. I wrote it for this TED Talk. I'm very excited to share it with you. It's called Fight for Unity. So here are the lyrics. Hopefully you all can see them, but I just want to do a little warm-up with you before we get into it. This is what we call a call and response song. So when I say, my sister, you sing, my sister. Beautiful. My brother, my siblings, my people. Beautiful. You're warmed up already. I love to see it. Okay, we're going to sing the whole thing. And then at the end, I will be singing the chorus by myself. If you have learned it and you want to join along, feel free to just hum in the background if you want to join in. But this call and response part is really what I'm most excited for. So let's get into it. My sister, my brother, my siblings, my people, I will stand, protect them, and honor their value, their labor, their wages must be fair to endure. We scorn those, condemn those who exploit our neighbor. We will fight for unity, so even the poorest people can thrive. We will fight for unity, so even when hard times come, we'll survive. We will fight for unity, so even the poorest people can thrive. We will fight for unity, so even when hard times come, we'll survive. Thank you so much.